Cloud. All right. Prachee, thank you so much for joining the Superbio Scientist Spotlight. Let's kick off. So please tell the Superbio community about yourself.
Sure. Okay, so I'm Prachee Avasthi. I'm the co-founder and CSO at Arcadia Science. I also, so at Arcadia, I oversee scientific strategy and also our publishing arm. So I'm also a big open science advocate. So the other hat I wear is I'm the head of open science at Astera Institute, a nonprofit that is really just looking to move the needle on various efforts from science to open science. So really I'm like a scientist by training. So that is a cell biologist. So my PhD was in neuroscience, but I was, in academia for many years, really with my own research lab, working in the field of cell biology, up until about 3 years ago when we started Arcadia Science. So that's like the short, in a nutshell version of who I am, but happy to tell you more about Arcadia and what we do.
Yeah, I'm also curious. So you said you're co-founder and CSO of Arcadia. You're also part of the leadership in ASAPBio, and both of these institutions, these organizations are like a strong commitment to open science. I'm curious, how did this passion for open science begin in your life?
Yeah, amazing. So I did step down as the president of ASAPBio, so I don't do that anymore. I handed that off around the time. Yeah, so I did. So the former executive director of ASAPBio is Jessica Polka. So I did hire her at Astera and stepped down myself from the board there. So handed that off to a very capable set of amazing folks to do that. But to answer your question on why open science, sort of this passion developed as when I was an academic, really, thinking a lot about, particularly when I started my own lab, just like when you for the first time, start making your own decisions about how you share your science, because it's really on you. And that happened quite serendipitously, very close in time to when I started learning more. And there was the first ASAPBio meeting actually on preprints in the life sciences through bioRxiv, which had started in 2013, a couple of years earlier than that. So really for me, it was sort of like learning about this all at the first time. I sometimes like to tell the story, which I won't tell in its entirety here, but I watched that ASAPBio meeting from my house on my couch. And then as you know, I smash cut, now I'm stepped down as the president of that organization. So it's one of those things where it's where truly just becoming sort of completely obsessed with an idea, finding that you really want to do science in a different way, try to make change happen, then can result in a lot of dominoes falling. So that's the sort of TLDR of that thing, which is that, it's very much, and I've always sort of had that philosophy that it's very much in our own hands, and that we all have the agency and the 1,000 fires of change. I really believe in this type of movement and the ability for that to really transform what we think is reality today. So really, my love for open science really came from realizing that in that time that, wait a second, we can just put our science on the internet when we want. And why don't we just do this? And as I start, it's one of those things I sometimes say, once you preprint, you can never go back, because the benefits are manifest. It's really impossible to really start to take advantage of science for the purpose of science and not for the purpose of all of these other things that become the goal if you make it so, and realize how much we're in our own way, and then you can't unsee that. And then it's oh my God, everyone needs to know about this. And then you have to tell everyone. And then you and I am like a walking commercial for things I love. So that sort of turned into a variety of things. And I ended up on a variety of different boards for eLife, for example, where we shifted from a journal to a preprint review service, the president of ASAPBio as well, and all these other things. And then the opportunity came to say, wait a second, I don't need to convince other people to do a thing by sharing their science differently and try to nudge that boulder. But what we could do instead is to just instead of convince them we could just do it and completely share our science in a different way and through Arcadia. So one of the things that we did is we have a radically open science model here where we are a for-profit company, but also think that the most pragmatic, best way to do science is out in the open. And so we're trying to move the needle on a variety of ways to really share early, often in very like pragmatic, useful, discoverable ways. I feel like, doing science, if you want to do it most rigorously and faster and better, like there's only one way I know how, and so I'm the open.
No, that's the philosophy that we can all get behind. As a matter of fact, that's the philosophy that Superbio stands behind, because that accessibility piece is really, really key, especially in AI. You can see
Oh,
a
yeah.
new large language model being published and released every single week, but we don't see an AlphaFold being released every single week. And I think it a little bit has to do with that open science piece, and sort of some things are behind closed doors in scientific world. And I'd love that you have built this up as a passion, and sort of incorporated a company and built a company around it. I'm curious, as the CSO of Arcadia, what does a day in the life of a CSO of Arcadia look like?
It is actively changing. Actually, one of the things I love about it is that it's never the same thing. And in fact, even reflecting on my old life, and I sometimes think about, oh my God, like part of what I love about it is that it's always something new. There's always some new challenge. It feels like because it is, feels like being in a startup where any manner of thing may happen, but I kind of thrive on this kind of chaos. You know what I mean? Like, it's like, I love this ability to sort of source these challenges, try to figure out how to have like this sort of grand, big, ambitious vision and mission, and then try to sort of get an entire org to sort of realize that in ways, like the thing that we're trying to do is really take something that, basically going from doing both discovery to translational science, for the purposes of discovering therapeutics, to developing therapeutics, but that usually takes like many decades and hundreds of scientists and a whole lot of luck, and we're trying to engineer that serendipity here, right? So it's trying to do a thing that seems impossible, right? So it's like when you have something like that feels that distant and that impossible, but trying to actually make it happen in a real way through, actually developing the technologies, actually getting the people and, like mission aligned people to make that happen is really what it is. But that means everything from, I directly manage a number of people, mostly managers. I spend a lot of my time, actually, it's one of the best things ever. I actually spend a lot of my time thinking about science and reading science. And like, it's one of the things I actually carve out time for, and now have done so more intentionally than I ever have in the past, instead of just being like purely in like wall-to-wall meeting, like fire putting out mode, to actually doing where I think my time and energy and is best spent. And so it's really anywhere from like directly supervising a number of people and managers, and all the things that go along with that, thinking about the science and getting aligned on those things across the organization, having that coordinated amongst different parts of the organization. Because when we say, one of our scientific thesis is that we use evolution as a shortcut to try and, do this many decades thing in a short amount of time. And so we develop the technologies to do that, but then we also deploy, we have scientists in-house that are basically leveraging those new and better starting points to get, new therapeutics companies up and running that we can spin out. And so it's really making sure that we can like bridge the gap to getting like our scientists who are starting those new things, like the best possible information and workflows possible, so that they can do their science more efficiently, but like get them to sort of leverage those technologies, which, it's one of those things where the science is so broad, because we're not building like a product or a thing or in this very specific domain. It could be anything, right? And we could land anywhere because we're trying to rationally mine the tree of life, right? So we could land anywhere, but that means that requires like a breadth and like a generalist mindset amongst our scientists, but that means that everyone's going to be experts in very, very different things. So trying to get all of that aligned, I spent a lot of time trying to sort of do the cross communication for those types of things, for people who are like very spiky in one domain to take advantage of people who are very spiky in another domain, and like so the whole thing can be greater than the sum of its parts. But the granular version is like, yeah, it's a lot of meetings and it's a lot of thinking and meeting.
No, I love that answer. Getting the spikes to play well together. It's
Yes,
a
getting the spikes to play well.
I think with that in mind, Prachee, because it sounds like Arcadia's overall mission is so ambitious and so big, I'd love to ask, what does success look like for you at Arcadia? And what implications does that have for the industry at large?
Yeah, I love that. So to me, I would say that, yes, we have like all these near-term things. Like we're a for-profit company. Of course, we want to generate successful spin-outs that go on to, like commercial success, all of those things. Like there are very clear like milestones and things. But in my mind, what we're really trying to do is, if we're able to do that successfully, right? Like go all the way from like sourcing technologies from life and biology to efficiently making spin-outs. If we're going to do that ridiculous thing and within these walls in like a short period of time, like if we're going to do that, then that means that we will have developed the technologies that allow us to do that, right? And that means that it's not just going to be useful to us, it's going to be useful to the universe, right? And so to me, success looks like really transforming how not just we, but everybody else does science, right? So that if we can actually do this sort of like, shortcutting and not have to sort of, stumble upon things that are just within or approximately near the space of what is already known and what has already been done, right? Like the fact that we are largely, the way we all like scientists learned how to do science was to, read the literature and see what's known and what's been done and then sort of like move past it. But it's like, if you're talking about the vastness of life and the vastness of biology, that is a tiny drop in the ocean. Most people have not worked on most things, right? Like that's just not good enough, right? It's just like, we're not going to get there if we do it this way, right? But luckily we can do better than that. We can do better than like the stories we tell ourselves. We have now a lot of data, right? Like we have a lot of data in the universe that exceeds what we say about that data and the narratives that we tell about it, right? And we, for the first time ever, in the most exciting moment in like, science and history in my life, we are at the moment where we can actually grok the complexity of this data in ways that are actually useful. And, and which I know I'm preaching to the choir on that one. So, for me, like the short answer is that these solutions that we come up with to sort of like leverage, what we do know about biology, the trillions of experiments that evolution has done for us, if we are able to rationally mine that and turn that into solutions and really shortcut, through like data-driven approaches to generate better hypotheses and solve them in better ways, that I hope will transform how everyone does science. And one of the reasons we do this in an open science context, because we don't want this to be just us. So to me, signals that other people are starting to leverage the solutions that we're coming up with. And to be clear, I never sort of want to claim that like, yeah, we've got all the answers, there's a solution and we've got it. Like that is not my approach at all. We know that it is something that we have a theory of the case for, we think we can make progress on, and we have this like unbelievable like opportunity and privilege to try. And so that's the thing I feel conviction around, and hope that success looks like everyone benefiting from the efforts that we put into that.
That is awesome. I absolutely love the attitude. And your comment on working with an enormous amount of data is an excellent segue into what I wanted to ask you next, which is like, at Superbio, when we think about the real potential of AI in the life sciences, one of the first things that we have to do is try to separate hype from reality, right? And there's nothing more hypey than AI now, or maybe at any time in the last like 20 years, right?
Oh my God, but it's so funny because it's true. Yeah. It's true, but also it really is like the promise is so immense, so it's one of those things where both things can be true,
Yeah, we believe so too, but nevertheless, it's like probably most of it. Anyway, we took a look at your online publications before inviting you on today, right? And we saw mentions of everything from like protein language models to predicting protein structure and more. And I'm just curious, like within the walls of Arcadia, which AI tools have you found to be transformative versus maybe a marginal or kind of dud value add?
No, I mean, I guess for us, like, so rather than like sort of call out individual things, like one thing we do, I guess I'll answer this in a very general way, which is to say a few of our learnings are that, when you are actually, of course, like all of these like whether it's protein language models or whatever it is, are trained on a very like biased data set. So one of the things that we are doing is we are trying to leverage like information that is much broader than like, like human focused things. Like we're developing data-driven approaches to find like even better, faster, more biologically and contextually relevant information to developing human therapeutics that may not be directly in humans. So even, I mean, people use model systems and things like that, but we're basically saying not only are we able to identify like the best, most simple model, but it's not just on the basis of like sequence alignment or things like that, taking into account many dimensions of biological information, from sequence to predicted protein structure to like protein properties to gene networks and all these other things, to say like we can actually take into account all of this information and actually identify the most relevant biological context that allows us to make even more progress on sort of the mechanistic details and the validation of these hypotheses and these predictive frameworks that we can actually come up with. So for us, one of the things is that because there is so much bias in that training data, that we are leaving a lot of like the generative space untouched, and so, but we do have other pieces of information that we have learned. Like we know, for example, the structure of evolution. We know a lot of information that is not taken into account. So one of the things that we are trying to do is to say, look, rather than sort of say, yeah, let's just throw more and more data at the problem and hope it learns something we already know, and it's like, we want to say like, let's take what we already know and then start like leveraging these technologies and see how much further we can get and how much more accurate our predictions can get. And then because we also happen to have like a lab in-house, we can do our own direct validation and then feed that back into our models and actually try to do even better. So that's what we're currently trying to do. And so I would say we see sort of similar challenges across the board on various things, like though there is a huge difference in the level of openness, right? So like there are some that are like fully available, and then there's some where like, well, we can't really like try these things out due to these licenses or their closed nature or whatever thing. And then we sort of just like try to put our own sort of, we always ask like, what can we uniquely bring to this problem that that we think that we can make some progress on. So for us, like we also find that it's actually similar to, like, I'm cell biology background, so I'll make an analogy that comes from like images. But like the same way, if you are able to sort of do image recognition and actually do data analysis on that, you spit out some answer, and it's like, do you trust that or not? You need to have some sort of biological intuition and some sort of guardrails on that sort of thing. And I do think like that's where I think there's like not so much like hype, but where there's like a lot of pitfalls in getting it wrong, because I think a lot of when you get sort of like deep tech tackling these things without the biological context, this is not sort of like, I'm not trying to pit anyone against each other or anything in this situation, but I do think that there is sort of, when you lack those sort of that context, it can feel like you're always getting closer without knowing whether you are, and in many cases, if you were to do the validation or have that biological context, you're like, oh, this actually is nonsense, this thing that it spits out, and it's like not actually biologically relevant, and so like experts in those domains like know that right away. And so that's part of why you get this like suspicion. It's like, wait a second. It's like, actually, but the funny thing is like, I see both sides of this thing, right? So like, I see that thing where as like an expert on various things, like I see like, oh, this thing's like absolutely does not pass the smell test, right? So when people are declaring victory, like, oh, look at this awesome thing my like, model can do. And then you're just like, it's absolute bullshit. So like, I have that in me, but then I'm also like following this like Twitter conversations of just like people just like dumping on the idea that like we're gonna be able to like augment scientists' work in order to like make giant strides in like curing diseases, developing therapeutics, all these other things. And like, not only do I believe that to be true, like I know it's true. Like I really believe that, like, I mean, I think that like we are already able to do things that I never thought were possible. And like this idea that when you just see all the skepticism, you're like, oh, AI will never do this. I'm like, I cannot imagine having the level of confidence in to be able to say like, oh, it will never do this. I'm like, oh, what was it like last week that like, that whatever was impossible is now possible? Like, or was it like yesterday? It's like, this is how fast it's moving. And we have like lived ourselves in this like short period of time where like insane things are possible. And so like, to me, I think the promise is so great. And like every single one of these things, I think one of the most fun parts of my job is I get to like, I'm like, actually trying to absorb this in real time and keep up with it, which is like an impossible task, but it's also just, you actually see like the pace of that progress very well if you're like really following it. And it just,
Totally.
you know, even if you were to like, even if like it's not linear or whatever, you know, the progress, it still feels like tremendous potential.
This reminds me of an interview I saw with Sam Altman recently, where he was talking about, at this point, ChatGPT was released to the world early last year, right? And there's all this discussions about, the Turing test and how it came and went. And like a year later, everyone's like, why is it so slow? And it's just amazing,
that's
like
how it works,
how
right?
quickly we adapt.
Technology exists for us to take it for granted and just like forget that there was a time before it, like.
Totally. Layers of abstraction since have long been forgotten, I guess.
Exactly. And so that's why I feel deep skepticism about the skeptics, like, and that's how I put it.
Understood. Well, we love that. I mean, we're definitely techno optimists as well. I'm curious to ask, because I saw another mention on your website at one point of computational thinking potentially having a lot to offer the practice of biological science, right? And based on everything you said, it sounds like all experts in these fields are all commingling within Arcadia, right? And I'm wondering, what are the sort of top one or two most important, thought frameworks or perhaps principles that you all have taken from computer science and applied it to other areas of science?
I mean, I think for us, I would say that one of the things that we are trying to tackle is sort of non-linearities, right? So these are the types of things where like biology is complicated. One of the reasons why we're sort of bad at predicting it in many cases and it's not even necessarily true. Like there are a lot of times when linear models are like quite effective, and so I think one of the things that particularly in genetics and when you're trying to do this, the sorts of things that we are doing, which is really trying to do sort of also trait mapping, right? So where we're trying to, we're basically doing genotype-phenotype interactions where phenotypes can be multidimensional and complex, and even our traditional ways of doing things are very sort of linear and additive and not as effective as we would like them to be because biology is just complicated. It's not just like some like fractional composition of like, some additive processes or whatever. And so, but that's what's like heritable, right? So like that's what we can tackle, and it makes perfect sense to say like let's take what we can do and then do something with it, But in our case, like I guess for the first time, right? Like we can take into account these sort of nonlinear interactions and not ignore the fact of what we already know about biology. Of course, genes interact with other genes. Of course, phenotypes interact with other phenotypes, right? Like that is a reality that we know and don't take into account because we up until now have not been able to do so as effectively as we can today, for a number of different reasons. Of course, like many of these things are not like new ideas as far as like building these models and these neural networks, but what is the case is that we are now able to, it's also the confluence of that with the ability to like get that multi-dimensional data in a way that actually reduces our like error in these predictions and things like that. So that I would say is like it's sort of like a common theme, something that we're really trying to get at, because it's what's so exciting about right now is that actually being able to, it feels to me for the first time that we, and I use the word grok lightly because it's not like we are actually fully, it's not like in a reductionist way we are absorbing it, right? It's like in this way, but we can, make these relationships strong enough to have some confidence in them. And so like, it feels like we can really grok the complexity of biology in some cases for the first time. And that is like unbelievably exciting, like I literally never thought like, even when you like work on things in like your academic life or even in your training or whatever, and you're just like working in your little corner and like doing like your little gene network and interactions and your favorite gene, YFG, your favorite gene, and you're like in a space and you know how complicated it is, but you're like, I'm just gonna do this one thing though, and it's just like you have this like sort of like back of like the head knowledge that like, yeah, but way more complicated than this and whatever. And of course you can do like, and I do think like even sort of like old school science, they do such elegant experiments and like that help you get to the systems levels, understanding and things. So I don't want to say that that's like not something that, speaking of like constraint breeding innovation, like without all the technologies we had today, there were some like pretty badass experiments. Like, you know, like actually like some of my favorite literature is like from like pre like sequencing, like pre, you know, like time, you know, a lot of really, really elegant organismal biology where like elegant genetics and elegant experiments really were teasing apart like a level of understanding that is like still surpasses a lot of work that happens today when people just like throw money at the problem, you know. And so that's where I think like it's still important for us to like remember those things. And actually that's one of the key tenets. I'm going to use it as a way to pitch a thing from Arcadia, which is like, you know, like actually one of the core missions of Arcadia is to say we don't actually want to do, like, we are not that company. We're not saying like, oh, because we have a lot of resources, let's just like max out the needle on spend and just see how far that can get us and see if we can be like do the things that no one else can do because we have more money. Like that's insane. You know, like really for us, we're thinking about like what is the impact of the thing that we do, and that real impact will be, again, what I was saying before, is if we actually transform, you know, how everybody can do science. Right now, if everyone who does science in whatever sector, in whatever circumstance, regardless of their like, you know, constraints and their like budget and whatever thing, can start to think and do science more efficiently, the impact of what we do here is so much greater than if we like burn a bunch of cash and do something that like no one's ever done before, you know? And so like, so that is the key tenet of our philosophy, is to say like, not what are just things that only we can do, what are things that we can develop that can make it so that everyone can do, you know, like do science more efficiently, if that makes sense.
No, absolutely. I did have one more big question for you about open science and just the culture of science in general.
Yes.
And the reason being that, you know, we sort of toe the line in what we do between the AI field and the life sciences field, right? And as we've talked about, AI is on this exponential growth curve. It's been absolutely explosive. And we think a huge reason for that is that as a discipline, it's embraced the culture of open source, right? And really recruited talent from like the entire globe and just taken off like a rocket ship, right? By contrast, biotech traditionally, you know, because not everyone is as committed to open science as you, unfortunately, right? Biotechnology is traditionally less accessible to the masses, as some would say, a walled garden, right? Yeah. Why do you think this is?
Oh, I mean, I just think it's a lot of it is sort of like sometimes the disappointing answer is that things are the way they are because that's how they've been. And I think not everyone, you know, and I see this all the time, because actually some of our, like when we recruit for Arcadia, like one of the first things I'm looking for is like a willingness to say, this is not just like the playbook. We're not just doing it this way because this is how everyone does it. You know, it's like, you don't want to like reinvent the wheel and just be a total noob on everything, but you want to understand what has been tried and what has been like, what works and what fails and things like that. But you also want to be able to reimagine what those solutions could be, given the time we're at right now, given where technology is at right now, given like, you know, what we think is possible and our vision, you know, all of those things. So having that be something that can happen. Now, I fully acknowledge, like, not everyone has the privilege to like experiment in those ways, right? It's like, you might have like one shot on goal before you run out of money. You might have like whatever thing. And it's like, that's very different than, you know, we sort of exist as an organization to reimagine that, right? So like that's really like a meta science organization. And so we have the ability to do those types of things. So some things are just like out of this conservatism. And then also like, you know, I think we get in our own way. Also, just this is true for not just biotech, but you can, I'm sure you will see millions of places in your life where this is true, which is that once you sort of start to say this, you always have to ask yourself, right? Like, what does success look like? But once you start to say, what does success look like and how will we measure it? Now you've got some sort of thing where you have like some metric that becomes the goal. And then in order to like prove to someone else that it's successful, that you have to sort of hit that thing. And then you start to do lower and lower risk things. And then you start to, you know, like, and you become more conservative and you try to say like, let's not like lose our advantage in whatever thing. And by sharing whatever, like you start to do all sorts of things that make like no sense anymore. Right? It's like the you know, this process and these metrics become the goal, and you start to lose the thread for like what you were after in the first place, right? And so I think that there's a lot of this sort of thing that happens, but also it needs to exist. And this is like why Arcadia exists. Sometimes it's like, I'm not going to convince someone like, hey, just do this thing totally differently. We want to just do it differently and then show people this is like among the reasons like we are a for-profit company. So we can say, oh, you know what? You can do this open science in this commercial context. And if we are able to succeed at that, we might change someone's mind about whether or not that's possible. You know, and I think like for us, like our experience in the last 3 years, like putting all of our science out there, so many people have said like, oh, I see now. Like they couldn't imagine what it would look like, but once they see it in action, we've gotten such incredible feedback on it where people are saying like, you know, even from an investor standpoint, they love it because they're like, it's not vaporware. We don't have to like trust that you have some black box and we're like, oh yeah, we're going to invest and hope it's real. You know, like they can see, especially if we are sharing it and people are using it and there's like evidence of its impact, that gives investors more faith in like, you know, in what we're doing and that it's real. And so like, this is always the case in my experience is that when you do science openly, like there are so many benefits pragmatically, you know, but in many cases, people don't know that until they do it. And so once you do it, like I said, it's sort of like opens your mind to like what is possible. And then everything else starts to make no sense, you know? And so I think that a lot of the reason is just like a keep on keeping on. This is what is done. This is, or even maybe it's just too big to sort of get everyone aligned on these sorts of things. Like, I think there are a lot of sort of like, you know, practical and boring reasons why biotech's not done that. But I hope by virtue of trying to do it differently and demonstrating that if we can succeed at that, that would be like among the most, I think, useful things that we can do. So in my mind, our open science is not just to say like, yeah, we want to sort of like, it's not like good vibes and everything. It is like, we believe in it. That's not just like my core belief that this is a good way to do science and it will accelerate progress in all the different ways. But if we can actually demonstrate that, you know, for academics to say like, look, we just share it right away because we're not just like trying to hang on to it for credit and some like stamp of approval in some paper. And for, you know, in the private sector, we're not just hanging on to it, just hoping that like, as if like every single thing you do in a company makes money, you know, like it's hard to make money, you know, the vast majority of what we do is not going to generate revenue. So like the most of that is of greater utility to the world than it is to us. And it will make our science go better, faster, more rigorously. So it's just like taking away this sort of scarcity mindset of just like, oh, it like, it's either or, it's this balance, it's this like, no, it's like, if we just try to keep our eye on the prize for science and progress for society, like it will like manifest itself in a way that I think it will become self-evident, you know, by virtue of like making it real, doing it, showing others what might be possible.
Well, for what it's worth, the vibes are good though, Prachee.
Awesome. I love it. I mean, it's a, you know, that's what happens like when you like actually believe a thing, and then it's like, and you know, but I think that people like scientists got into science for these reasons, right? It's like it's easy to forget. It's easy to forget. You get into whatever it is that's supposed to happen, and you know that's what I mean. Like these boring reasons why like things don't happen all the time, and I think that. You know, that's why I don't actually think it's that hard to sell because, like, you know, as you might imagine, there's not many people. I mean, I guess I'm like, you know, a little bit of a bubble. Like maybe you only talk to like end up talking to people who already agree with you or something. But like, but usually, and actually, it's not true because I argue with a lot of people. But I do think that it is the case that you know when it's not that difficult of a case to make because people already want to do science in this way. You know, they sort of feel like they can't, or they don't know how, or there's like all sorts of reasons or boring reasons, but there's like, but I think the sort of like philosophy of it is something that's not that difficult or, you know, that hard to align people with.
I mean, switching gears and looking at the future a little bit and talking about why scientists get into this field, I wonder, you know, looking back on your journey on this, in this new scientific world, what advice would you give to sort of aspiring researchers hoping to make waves in this, you know, brave new scientific world?
Oh man, I love this question. So, well, I sometimes say like I don't give advice anymore because I like you know use mentor students or whatever, and like and you know you start realizing just like the degree to which like so much advice is sort of noise, you know. But I think like I can still answer this question because I think there's one thing that I find to be like universally true is like maybe like among my favorite words in the universe is agency. Like I actually like the true belief that people can actually themselves behave and act in a way that is going to impact the world is so important of an idea that I would say that like almost every reason I hear to not do that is because of this like lack of agency, that it feels like someone else is in control, that one can't do these various things, or that all the things that can't happen, like I find those walls and those constraints to be like extremely fuzzy, you know, in the sense that like, you know, almost always it is possible for there to be some room to maneuver and do some sort, something that might make an impact. And that will necessarily transform your view of the world, your view of what's possible, and have impacts much outside yourself. And so, like, I think if I could just like gift everyone just like a vial of just like pure agency, I would give one to everyone.
I love that. That's awesome. Well, I think we have two more questions for you, Prachee, before we let you go. The first one is our signature question, and we ask you to think about a hypothetical future where the year is 2022. We ask you, what did AI do to our lives? Are we living forever, or is it 1984-esque world where we're all living under
so as you know, I'm an extreme optimist. And it's like to my own detriment, maybe, but I actually believe that, I mean, even just in our lifetimes and what has happened so far, things that I could not have ever imagined are possible. So whether living forever is the thing and what that even means, like what that even means for like perpetual consciousness versus like our actual, bodies, whatever, like I don't necessarily think of it that way, but I do think that there are things that we don't have to live with anymore, like I just, in the same way that we, with vaccines, we don't have to live with, truly, horrible infectious diseases in all of the possible realms. Like we are, of course, there's always new things and we're always battling those things, but it's just so demonstrably, like, yes, it did, of course, affect life expectancy and things like that. But I think that there are things that are part of our realities today that will become, just so much more tractable and like solvable, in a way that, and in the same way as it's actually very similar to the way I think about how we leverage technology, where I have this optimism of like, we will just continue to do like more complex and harder things. Like I don't sort of see as like, AI is going to like take over like us and do like be us and solve human problems. I actually, one of my biggest challenges is thinking that we shouldn't just solve problems of our own making, like we can solve problems that are way bigger than us, that we aren't, like this is often we get into this like local minimum of just being like, oh yeah, let's just like, here's the problem I have, let me like fix that problem. But it's like, no, like go back to an earlier fork in the road where we don't even have that problem because we don't have to do it this way, and I think often we are like solving these types of problems of our own making. And I think if we're really, really going to have these like big step functions and what's possible, I think we can really say, we don't need to try and just like solve every single one of these problems. I think that we can tackle like the low-hanging fruit or things that we can't even grok the enormity of or whatever through the like quantity of data and whatever. We can leverage, AI in all the ways that it is best leveraged, but that really frees us up to evolve into something else, that we can actually become like capable of so much more if our time and energy isn't spent on like the low throughputness of like, the way that we like live and operate today.
Awesome. Well, it's been amazing to have you here. Our final question is just to ask, what's next for you, Prachee?
Oh man, it's like never know. I mean, I feel like this is one of those things where, I used to say like, oh, what would it be like? Because I was an academic, like, oh, what would it be like if I'm not like, as a trainee, like moving every few years or whatever? And we know the answer. I do that anyway. But for me, I think like I am like laser focused on actually trying to like, for me, I think like sometimes I say we're on iteration like 6,000 of this company. It's a new challenge every day. It's like a new company every day. So it feels so fresh to me constantly because we're always finding new and better ways to do things. I think Seema and I have this like thing in common, which is that, so my co-founder, we literally, we pivot so hard and so fast because neither of us has the tolerance to just like continue to like do things like that we think are not working anymore. It's just like, if it's not working, we'll just fix it. We'll just, like, no, there's no shame in being wrong and trying again, So, and so in that way, we continue to sort of like whiplash this organization to try and continue to be the best version of itself that it can be. But I just, I love this work and I really hope that, that we can make an impact in a lot of different dimensions and really look forward to like how the rest of the ecosystem evolves with us, like co-evolves with us, and that means that we're just going to continue to like leapfrog each other to become, I don't know, just like it just is such an awesome, exciting time in science. So I don't know. Right now, I'm enjoying it a lot, and yeah. So we'll see.
That's awesome to hear. Well, the energy is infectious. Thanks so much again for sharing it with us.
Of course. Yeah. Thank you so much. I really enjoyed chatting with you both. And yeah,
Awesome.
This was a lot of fun. And yeah, I was thinking like, oh man, I got to be on for this thing. And then, but then, you got me talking about all my favorite stuff, and here we are.
I'm super, super glad to hear it. That was the goal.
No, I'll second you, but energy is absolutely infectious, and it's so animating to talk to people that are passionate about what they're doing, and I feel grateful to have met you over this call. Well, thank you so much for being a part of Superbio Science Spotlight, Prachee.
Yeah, so thanks so much for asking me, and great to meet you, and great to see you, Eva. And yeah, so I'll see you on the internet.
All right, sounds